Good afternoon, everyone on the East Coast. Welcome to Lunch with Lincoln. My name is Maya May from LPTV's We're Speaking. I'm here on the West Coast, so good morning to everybody on the West Coast. I'm here with Senior Lincoln Project Advisor, Stuart Stevens, author of It Was All a Lie. Thank you for being here, Lunch with Lincoln today. Hello.
Great to be here, Maya. Thanks for asking me to the party.
Yeah, well, we need you at the party, at this new party, because this new party needs hope. We are facing a very tough week. There's been a lot of discussion and questions of like, is this what 2022 is going to look like? There's been all this talk around like, oh, the Republicans won big in Virginia. Now, I looked at it and I said, okay, I think it was only, I think 48% of people actually voted for McAuliffe. So it's not as dire. It's not as dire as it feels like everyone's trying to make it seem. And so that's where I want to start, right there.
Yeah, it was said that the ancient Egyptians could hold two completely contradictory thoughts simultaneously without any tension. And so I kind of have two completely contradictory thoughts about this. On the one hand, I worked as a Republican consultant in a ton of deep blue states where we elected Republican governors, sometimes for the first time in a very long time. In Massachusetts, we elected the first Republican governor in 20 years. In Maryland, we elected the first Republican governor since Spiro Agnew, and Spiro didn't exactly help the brand. In New Jersey, elected Chris Christie. Vermont, Phil Scott, one of Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden's best states. And none of those states, after electing Republican governors, went Republican in the subsequent presidential years, the subsequent Republican federal races. If you look at Virginia, the last time they elected a Republican governor was 2010. That was a guy named Bob McDonnell. Democrats went on to win the presidential race in 2012, 2016, and 2020.
Okay.
So there's a lot to be said that these governor's races are very specific to local issues. I think there's a different mindset as to why people vote for a governor than they vote for sort of a nationalized agenda that is part of a federal race. A lot of times you elect them for a balance.
Okay.
I think that's classically, like, particularly on fiscal issues. I want to elect somebody in Maryland who'll sit in the corner office and stop crazy spending. At the other hand, the other contradiction, though, is I think that Democrats have a real messaging problem. There's a lot that they've accomplished, and they're sort of stuck in this bad message cycle where it's process dominated and not results dominated. And they've got to break out of this. I actually have a lot of confidence in the Biden people. I think they ran a brilliant campaign that's underappreciated for how brilliant it was. So
do you think part of that is that people do have a short-term memory issue going on right now, where the news cycle is so fast that people, it's to try to get on top of messaging when everything is like this, and it seems like the Democrats like to deliberate and think about things and consider things, where the GOP strategy is just like attack, instill fear, and it's very one note, but it's a note that works.
Yeah, I mean, my test for that is, ask anybody what was the lead story in the news 3 days ago. I mean, I know if you hold a gun to my head, I tell you, just shoot me. I have no idea.
We don't want to do that.
I can't tell you, what was on the news 2 nights ago. So I think that there is, I've always thought, as somebody who worked against Democrats, that where their biggest weakness was the inability to emotionalize policy. Now, with some big exceptions, Obama was brilliant at this. But to be able to talk about how this feels in your life and what it means in your life in an emotional sense, and most of us react to the world emotionally rather than intellectually.
Right.
So right now they're trying to pass all this stuff that would be wildly popular. The anti dental benefits for Medicare lobby is pretty small. Child tax credits. Everybody's for child tax credits. The idea you're going to have universal pre-kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
That's wildly popular. People forget that Medicare for all, if you just test Medicare for all, not mandatory Medicare for all,
Mm-hmm.
always tested better than a border wall.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense. It makes, like Medicare. Medicare is not a negative word. People like Medicare. It's a success. Instead, they're talking about this process, like reconciliation. I mean, what is reconciliation? It sounds like a cover band in some frat party.
That nobody wants to listen to either.
Yeah, they got to get out of this and talk about what
the
it would mean
impact
in your life.
Right.
The specifics of it. I've always thought Democrats overvalued the degree to which people understand the process.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're in the middle of it, you obviously do understand it. It all makes sense.
Well, and it goes back to audience, right? Because we're storytellers, both you and I. And I'd like to think that Democrats, liberals, the artists of the world, I like to think are incredible storytellers, but storytelling starts with understanding your audience. Yep. So it's what sounds like what you're speaking about right now is the fact that there's a disconnect between what the Democrats think they're saying and then what their audience, their target audience, is hearing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think you have to lay out what the choice is. So if the choice is between 1.6 trillion or 2.5 trillion, I mean, nobody knows what the hell that means. People probably say, well, less is more. But if you say, would you like more money spent on roads? If you would like, that bridge is falling down the road from you. If you'd like to walk into airports in America and not feel that they're a disaster. Mm-hmm. If you'd like better Wi-Fi, mm-hmm. the pro-slow Wi-Fi market is pretty small. If you say, okay, this is the choice. Democrats want these things, mm-hmm. and this is the cost. Republicans are against it. I think that you really change the dynamic of the argument. Mm-hmm. And I think there is this inability that Democrats have to accept what has happened to the Republican Party. The Republican mm-hmm. Party is not a normal political party now. And I say that, I never thought I'd say this. But it's true. How do you negotiate with a party that doesn't believe that the president of the United States is legally elected?
Right.
Well, where do you start to have a conversation?
Yeah, I mean, every time we run Last Week in the Republican Party, which I don't know if we have it, we could probably play it, and it would help us remember some of the crazy things that have been in the news cycle. Do we have it, B? I wouldn't mind running that right now because I think this is a key point that we do need to talk about. I'll give you a second to pull it up. But you can find it. Great, you can find it. So in these clips, which we run like every week, we see kind of like an amalgamation of all of the crazy things that have happened, right? And what I'm noticing is obviously 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, all of this would have seemed completely crazy. It would have alienated any sane person, right? But then Trump made it possible to do this. Trump made it possible to be a bully, and people go, yeah, I want to be like that. I can do that myself. And so what we're seeing now, I feel like, is the GOP has responded to that and embraced it, whereas the Democrats are like, how do we beat a bully without becoming a bully? How do we attract attention when they've literally taken everything that has to do with spectacle and made it their own?
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem is, say you're working in the White House, right? Democrats still see themselves as a governing party. Republicans have really abandoned that on a federal level. So it's very difficult for the president of the United States to go out and say, Republicans want to end democracy. Mm-hmm. It's something I think it's true in a way that sounds alarmist, but I keep saying this, to whatever we talk about what is happening now, to me, it's like a pandemic. What you say at the beginning is going to sound alarmist, and when at the end, it's going to seem way inadequate. That's what we need to say in the Lincoln Project. I think that just as we insisted that Donald Trump should be the issue in 2020, it's difficult for the White House to say this stuff and not alienate a lot of people. And Biden is an old school consensus politician. He comes out of the Senate. He's very good at that stuff. So, I have a lot of sympathy for what it's like to work in that White House. And you're trying to get stuff done. And you have to, it'll be a lot easier when you get to the other side of this. Let's just put it that way. If you can get this stuff passed, so you make 2022 in part about Republicans who want to take away this stuff. And ultimately, the dirty little secret about the deficit is that really, for all the 1.2 million spots that I and other Republican consultants have made about the horrors of the deficit, people actually like spending more money.
We love shopping.
Which is why,
who doesn't love shopping?
Why we have a deficit. Mitch McConnell is the biggest hypocrite of this. It took 208 or something years to get to 10 trillion in deficit, and in the years that Mitch McConnell was majority leader, has been majority leader, we've increased it another 10 trillion. So,
do you think part of the problem, I think about opportunity cost, right? And I think about how much time is wasted with the infighting right now as a country, not just, within the Democratic Party, but also the Republican Party and also the country as a whole, which means we can't invest in growth in the ways that we could. And so is that a big part of this growing deficit?
I think it's a big part of the danger facing the country on all fronts. We've seen it with COVID. When the Republican Party has become an anti-science, anti-truth party, what do you do with that? How is it that vaccination in America became so politicized? This didn't happen in Canada. They have a big conservative party in Canada, and you didn't have this fight. Is vaccine good or bad? The most conservative politicians in Canada embraced it. Look in Israel, the ultra Orthodox embraced vaccination, and they were one of the fastest vaccinated countries in the world. It is a deeply troubling phenomenon, and what I think is most difficult for so many people to accept is that there is this autocratic movement in America. And, people who are normal, we have this, and most of us are, but we have this assumption when someone is being abnormal that they will revert to normalcy.
Right.
You saw this over and over with Trump. We even have a language about it. They'll revert to normal. They're not going to revert. This is normal to them.
Right.
So what is difficult for us to accept is that the majority of the Republican Party, we're the driving force in the Republican Party. It appreciates that it has become a white grievance party. It appreciates, you look at what happened in Virginia, 88% of African Americans voted Democratic. So they see this changing America. 1 out of 10 of the new Americans in the new census is white. Of the Americans 15 years and under, the majority are non-white. So, odds are really good they're going to turn 18 and still be non-white. That's the death of the Republican Party if it doesn't become more appealing to non-white voters. So we had this choice. Could we change and appeal to non-white voters? Or if we don't, can we try to change the system so that it is much more difficult for non-white voters to vote? And the tragic decision was made to make it more difficult for non-white voters to vote instead of changing. And this was a long time in the development. And I wrote about it, and it was all a lie.
Well, I wanted to get to that because, when we talk about trying to, the party of the white grievance party, it seems like, in a way, it's always been that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I first heard about the Southern strategy in your book. I'm sure most people listening, watching have heard about it too, but if you could just tie it up for us and tell us what it is.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So 1956, Eisenhower got, I think, 46% of the African American vote.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, almost half.
Mm-hmm.
Nixon got 33%. Jackie Robinson campaigned for Nixon. So then you get to 1964. Goldwater's a nominee. Goldwater's against the Civil Rights Act. You go from 46% with Eisenhower to 8 years later, 7% of African Americans supported Goldwater. Now, you could have made a case at the time, and I would have made it if I hadn't been like 6 years old or something, that after the Civil Rights Bill passes, that African Americans would, in some substantial numbers, come back to the Republican Party for shared cultural values of family, patriotism, entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't happen. So, you went from 46 to 7%, and then you stayed in that trading range where if ever since 1964, if you're a Republican and you could get more than 10% of African Americans, that was considered a great success. So there were all these Southern Democrats. I mean, we forget more Republicans voted for the Civil Rights Bill in the Senate than did Democrats. Mm-hmm. But it's sort of a phony statistic in a way, because these Southern Democrats, it was about what region you represented. And the old Confederacy Democrats, and like when I grew up in Mississippi, there were only Democratic senators. There was really only the Democratic Party. And they were old line segregationists. And so they became Republican. They either converted and became Republican, or when they resigned, you had Republicans elected. And there's a famous memo that was written in the Nixon White House by Pat Buchanan. And it talked about, for Nixon's reelection, now they talk about in this memo that Nixon had actually done a lot of things that benefited African Americans. And if you go back and you look at Nixon, I mean, he seems like a Marxist compared to where the Republican Party is now. I mean, yes. He was for wage and price controls. I mean, it's amazing. But they said, oh, even though we've done all this great stuff for African Americans, we're not going to get their vote. So therefore, we have a choice here. Mm-hmm. We have to make it. We have to divide the Democratic Party vote of African Americans, or discourage African Americans from voting. And that really became the Southern strategy. And if you look at what happened in 2016, that is exactly what the Russians did. Mm-hmm. By stirring up dissent within the African American community with these phony groups on Facebook, these phony rallies. Right. Yep. I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, it's like they were going from this playbook that Pat Buchanan wrote.
Yeah, the disinformation campaign, I can tell you from like a personal level, very much. I had so many conversations with my own family members where I was like, where are you hearing this? Yeah. And it turns out it was Facebook. It was bots. It was these bot farms. It was all of this to sow that kind of division. And it worked.
So you go to Glenn Youngkin, right? Glenn Youngkin is sort of the domesticated version of the Southern strategy, right? Glenn Youngkin, if you ask him, are you a racist? I'm sure he could pass a lie detector test saying no.
Right.
But he ran on this racially divisive campaign.
Yep.
When you talk about critical race theory, it's not taught in the schools. Mm-hmm. And it is a way to talk about race. And there's a famous interview, we made a spot about it, that Lee Atwater, who was a Republican consultant, who, I came up, and Lee was a big deal in politics, and I worked some with Lee. And, Lee was very open about this when he was dying, and he went through this process of slowly dying of brain cancer, where he really reflected on his life. And he talked about, when you couldn't use the N-word, the words that you needed to use as code words. Mm-hmm. And critical race theory figures into that. Mm-hmm. So they put this woman on television, this white woman, talking about these horrible books that her son was forced to read. First of all, I go back and go like, what high school kid comes home and complains about books that they're reading to their mom? I
They
mean,
don't.
I just, what a
No.
weird guy. I mean, you really like mom, I got, I mean,
I have to read Beloved. I can't.
I mean, it's like, so who was it? It was Toni Morrison, the only African-American Nobel laureate in literature in America. So you're reading Toni Morrison. Now, Glenn Youngkin is not afraid of Toni Morrison. He spends almost $40,000 a year to send his son to a school where they have seminars on Toni Morrison.
Okay.
At Georgetown Prep. But it is a way to talk about race without being the media accusing you of race.
Right. Yep.
And I think it's evil. I think that Democrats are very bad at calling this out.
Mm-hmm.
So, you talk to Joe Trippi, who's part of the Lincoln Project now. So Joe really, of his generation, was the best Democratic consultant, right? He would crop up at sort of irregular intervals and ruin my life over the last 30 years. It was
good. I'm glad.
Oh shit, we have to go against Trippi. This is bad. And he was saying, using the example that what they should have said about critical race theory is not just that it's not taught, but that it's not going to be taught.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to teach critical race theory anywhere but law schools. I mean, it has no relevance. We're not going to allow this. So don't just say we don't, but say we're not going to do it, and go out and accuse Republicans of doing what they're doing, put them on the defensive.
So here's the thing. It seems like the GOP, in this sense, they understand their audience, right? They understand that when they use critical race theory, which nobody seems to be able to explain, right? We saw that in the exit polls. They know that it works. They understand that it works. And part of it is because this grievance that people have, we can't ignore it, right? People are feeling like, it's interesting to me that they feel marginalized when they're not. They feel like their culture is being canceled when it's not. But when something feels very real, any winning strategy has to take that into account. And so that's I feel like that's the hard question of the day, is like, how do you speak to those people? Because yes, we can't have reconciliation at the top level, right? Like that's we haven't played we'll have to play the video in a second if we have time, or y'all can all go watch it online. But the leadership, there's no reconciliation there. But the base, when we talk about the people, when we talk about like that, we have to speak to them, don't we, to be able to bring them in?
Yeah, I mean, I think all races are ultimately about what question are voters asking to be answered when they go in the booth. Mm-hmm. And I think people have a lot of different emotions. I mean, there's this amazing statistic out there that a certain number of people who voted for Barack Obama in his first election believed that he was born in Kenya. Which, I mean, how do you they still were for Obama, which meant that they were voting for a guy who would have been illegal to be president, but they still were going to vote for him. I mean, I go back and look at it. It's some incredible numbers, like mind-boggling, like 22% or something. But it didn't matter to him because what was important was what he was saying. So, first, I think it's an acceptance of what is happening here, that racism is not an economic issue. It is an issue of racism. So if you go back and read, the stories are written when David Duke ran in Louisiana for governor and almost won. All of these stories were written about there's economic depression in Louisiana. There was an oil bust. There's all these, white people who, have lost their jobs. Therefore, they have to vote for David Duke. I think that's utter nonsense. I think they were voting for David Duke because he was white and he scared them about black people. And I think that you have to go out and deliver a message to these people that does appeal to what is the best of them. I mean, this is something I think Barack Obama was brilliant at doing. And look at these places that Barack Obama won.
Right.
And I don't think you can go out and accuse people of being evil, like you're saying, or being racist, but you have to confront this. And most people want to engage in anything that makes them feel better about themselves.
Yep.
And what happened with Donald Trump was he validated your worst self, that it was so easy to be a Trump supporter. So that side of us that all feel, a bit of road rage when somebody cuts you off on the highway, Donald Trump says that's your best self.
Yeah.
And you should embrace that. So it was so easy. It didn't require anything of you. It wasn't a challenge to you.
Right.
And it's very weird. I mean, most of the leaders that are in our lives, from coaches to teachers to Boy and Girl Scout leaders, they ask us to be better, to do better. They challenge you. And people respond. They like that. And in the military, as the military reformed itself post-Vietnam and dealt with these racial issues, they confronted that and they asked people, and it's become socially unacceptable inside these cultures to be racist, even though people are racist. Right. And that is critical. And that is something that has to be done now. And you shouldn't be shy about calling out Glenn Youngkin and saying, this is what you're doing, Glenn. This is what you're doing.
Yep.
This isn't what you believe, but this will be your legacy. And I think there's a hesitancy to do it that Democrats should get over.
Yeah, I think this decision of always going with the this is the alternative. Like you don't want this alternative, as opposed to speaking to a future that everyone feels like they can be a part of. I think that is the sweet spot. I think that's what Obama was able to do, is he gave people that hope and created a future that wasn't like, oh, we're going to sideline people who are feeling marginalized. No, we're going to bring all people in. And this right now, like the lowest common denominator fight that is happening right now. And I do want to pull the let's play this last week in the Republican Party, because I want everybody to see exactly what we're talking about. So if you could play that, that would be great.
When do we get to use the guns? No, and I'm not, that's not a joke. I'm not saying it like that. I mean, literally, how many elections are they going to steal before we kill these people?
We have metal detectors outside of the House chambers because of me.
Today, I am calling for the creation of a formal commission to investigate the true origin of COVID-19, the role Fauci played in its creation, the false statements he made to members of Congress under oath, and why the hell Americans are funding the torture of puppies in Africa. Americans deserve the truth, and this demon doctor must never be allowed to escape justice.
Dr. Fauci would be right in there in the same room with people like Dr. Mengele and Dr. Zell, who worked for the Nazis.
My God, a parent did a Nazi salute at a school board because he thought the policies were oppressive.
God himself gave Donald Trump the strength and the courage and the wisdom to pardon me. On the morning I was arrested, at 6:06 in the morning, the night before I'd fallen asleep reading the Bible.
I'm constantly appalled and disgusted at how unqualified people are in Congress.
Well, just remember the key facts. The dossier was the Clinton campaign paying Perkins Coie, who hired Fusion, who hired Christopher Steele to create this fake dossier.
Randy Weingarten, who's the head of the most powerful teachers union in the country, she doesn't have a single child. If she wants to brainwash and destroy the minds of children, she should have some of her own and leave ours the hell alone.
Critical race theory is nothing more than state-sponsored racism.
There are a lot of communists that sit in our elected government currently.
I see Democrats who are envious of the Chinese Communist Party every day.
We need to get rid of this January 6th commission and replace it with a November 3rd commission.
And honestly, we have businesses that have been locked down and lives destroyed for over a year based on saying no COVID vaccine passports
made in China.
In my mind, the only thing that can combat that is a hopeful future that brings people in. And what's concerning to me is the thing that most stuck out for me in that clip was Pence saying that CRT is teaching racism, that it's racist.
Yeah, I'm a 7th generation Mississippian, and I grew up in that culture of the lost cause. That you were not taught that slavery was good, but you were taught that General Lee was this iconic figure. And you would have Old South balls, and there was this sort of created fiction that rewrote history. And it is extraordinarily insidious. And it is, without truth dealing with history, there can be no truth.
That's exactly right.
And it really is part of an anti-reality that Republicans Party now, it doesn't, because it has failed to attract majority of non-white voters. The country is becoming more non-white at a rapid rate. The fastest growing fastest declining large demographic group in America is non-college educated whites. They used to be 60% of the electorate, say, 80 when Reagan won. And now they're 41% and declining. Here's a little statistic that always blows my mind. When Ronald Reagan won this sweeping landslide, I think like 44 states in 1980, he got 57% of the white vote. When John McCain lost, he got 57% of the white vote. And that is the fear that Republicans have. Right. So when you don't like reality, you try to create your own reality.
Exactly.
And that's what is happening with the Republican Party. I think it's unsustainable in the long term, but it is entirely possible that there is a very viable roadmap that Republicans will be able to change the rules of democracy such that they will be able to maintain what is predominantly a white power base, even though the country changes. And this is why Republicans have fallen in love with Viktor Orban in Hungary.
Exactly.
Because, Viktor Orban was democratically elected, and he slowly, well, I don't know if you want to say slowly or not, it's been 10 years, maybe that's fast, changed Hungary into an unrecognizable system of government to what it was pre-Orban. And that's the model. That's what they want to do.
It is the model, and they are following it. And the antidote to that reality that they're trying to create that they can control is the truth. We have to remember that, everybody. We're going to wrap on that. Please remember that the truth, it's out there. It's here. We have to embrace it for all that it is and continue to do this work. It's Friday. Go out and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for being here, Stuart. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
and we'll see everybody next week.
All right.